Good afternoon. It's good to see you this afternoon. I'm the Reverend Dr. Beth Johnson. I'm the minister of this church, and it is an honor to greet you and welcome you today. We're going to begin by lighting a chalice, which is the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist Association, one that's lit in this community every Sunday. Life is a gift for which we're grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and mysteries of this gift. In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life and love. Let this light bring comfort in sorrow, peace to our hearts, and the hope of love remembered and shared. Once again, good afternoon, friends. I want to welcome you to this place, a space made sacred in this season of loss, with the spirit of love and friendship you bring as we gather to remember J. Robert Wayman, known as Bob, to mourn his death to celebrate his life, and to say goodbye. We come together as family and friends, church members, co-creators of a community that includes those present and those who could not be with us here today. We gather to be embraced by the warmth of community, by the richness of remembering, and by the power of love. For inasmuch as it is death that gathers us together in this place, it is love and memory that calls us into this sacred and special time. It is the memory and appreciation of the presence and love that Bob embodied that dances with the grief that we share at his death. For even as we acknowledge the beauty of life, this enjoyment exists besides the inevitability of his perishing. And even for one such as Bob, who lived life fully and well, even for one such as this, we mourn his passing, and we wish for one more moment with our dad, with our grandpa, with our friend, cousins. And this is what we know. We're born, we flourish and fade and die to this life. And yet we live on in the hearts and minds of those we love, those who love us, and those whose influences are shared and we live on. It is this influence that Bob exerted in his own unique way that we pause to share. For it is in the sharing that we're made more whole, and he lives on in the lives of those who remember him. So on behalf of J. Robert Wayman's family, his wife Nancy, his son Bob, daughter-in-law Debbie, their children Shelby and Adam, daughter Bonnie and son-in-law John, and their children Nathan and Caitlin, and all those others who are gathered in memory, welcome into this place of memory. Welcome into this space of grief. Welcome into this time of celebration. In Unitarian Universalism, we call our memorial services celebrations of life. So we gather to mourn, yes, to remember, yes, and to celebrate, yes, even yes, to a life well lived, one of love and companionship and care. It is good to be together. Our reading is by the late Reverend Edward Searle, longtime beloved minister of this congregation. Always there is a beginning, a new day, a new month, a new season, a new year. Forever the old passes away and newness emerges from the richness that was. Nothing is ever lost in the many changes time brings. What was in some way will be through changed form. Know this. This moment is a beginning. This moment is a beginning. And your lives, individually and together, are full of richness, of freshness, of hope, and of promise. And it is in the promise of these words that we gather. Thank you, Carolyn. This service is woven together with the songs, two of the songs that Bob felt the two things that he wanted in the service were these two songs, Simple Gifts, and you'll hear Ode to Joy later. The service is always a weaving together of a life and experience. J. Robert Wayman, known by all as Bob, was born on October 11th, 1935 in Indianapolis, Indiana. He died on August 9th, 2024 in Lombard, Illinois, and in between was a beautiful life devoted to family and to community. Now, throughout this life story, I'll refer to J. Robert as Bob, and I'll refer to Bob Daniel Wayman, his son, as our Bob. I'm grateful to Bob and to Bonnie for having been able to share with me your dad's life, and John as well, and for this story. So much of it I did not know Bob, but he came to life for me in my imagination, hearing the stories and hearing siblings talk about their experience of their families. So much of what I'm sharing with you today was shared with me by Bob and our Bob, and I appreciate it. Bob was the youngest of two sons, Jane Wayman and Ellen Davidson. His parents were from the southwest of Indiana. His mother went to Teachers College at Butler University in Indianapolis, and his father spent 1 year at the School of Commerce at Valparaiso University. James Wayman, his dad, worked as a clerk for the Missouri Pacific Railroads and was frequently transferred, including a few years in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Glen Ellen, eventually landing in Green Hills, Ohio, outside of Cincinnati, where he graduated high school. His parents lived through the Depression and were always frugal, a quality that Bob would acquire and share through his entire life. Bob's parents were free thinkers, but conventional in their family roles, as was true of so many for that time. They were members of the Northern Hills Unitarian Church in Cincinnati. The Unitarian connection would skip a generation until our Bob and Debbie found their way here to be married by their beloved minister, whose words I just shared, the late Ed Searle, and then Bonnie joining the family tradition of living their values in the world. Our Bob speculated that his dad got his open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity, along with the love of classical music from his folks. It seems also to have sparked a lifelong interest in trains, which you see all of that interest demonstrated along with his friends who are here from the museum. He also, again, learned that frugality from his folks. The community where Bob grew up is a unique planned community, one of 3 Greenbelt communities built by the Resettlement Administration during the 1930s. It was designed with a belt of woodland and natural landscaping surrounding it. Bob has fond memories of walking in the woods and swimming in the community pool. Seeing our Bob's gorgeous nature pictures, one can't help but imagine that his love of nature and intellectual curiosity found its way to him through his dad. Upon graduation, Bob went to the College of Engineering at the University of Cincinnati, completing his BSEE, which would have been a bachelor's in electrical engineering, and working as a co-op student for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He enjoyed his time working for the railroad and was still telling stories from that time up until about a few weeks before he passed. Can you imagine bringing those memories and that love and that affection and that interest all the way through his life? It was so important to him, and so were his friends from the railroad. While at UC, Bob attended a Methodist student gathering where he met a young nursing student, Nancy Dietrich. As they told the story, and our Bob related it to me, their mom was mainly interested in their dad for the meals outside the dorms. And it also seems that Nancy's nursing gene made its way to Bonnie. And we decided, as we talked, that there must have been a connection beyond food, because they were married on October 3rd, 1959. And they were just shy of their 65th wedding anniversary when Bob passed. Nancy's from a large extended family in Quincy, Ohio, a town of about 500 people. It was a progressive household. Coming from a small nuclear family, Bob was said to have been a little overwhelmed when he first visited the Quincy family, where Nancy had 7 aunts and a wealth of cousins. But with his love of family, his commitment to family, I can imagine that he welcomed the opportunity to have more relatives. Bob graduated from UC and took a job at Commonwealth Edison in Chicago. He worked his entire career there, retiring in 1997. At ComEd, he saw the implementation of new communication systems used to control the electric power network and the company's telephone systems. His work there resulted in innovations that we enjoy today. Legacy lives on. He was a hard worker and successful as an engineer. After officially retiring, he was called back as a consultant because they still needed him. And Bonnie recounted that he was so good that they kept calling him back and giving him twice the amount he was making to come back as a consultant, and then calling him back and giving him 3 times the amount of pay each time. There is a valuable employee and person who made a difference. Bob was a hard worker and always, though, prioritized his family with what our Bob describes as his own version of work-life balance. With Nancy working a 3 to 11 shift, hospital shift as a nurse, he made dinner and took care of Bob and Bonnie, and Bob told me it was Kraft macaroni and cheese. But the food was there, y'all. They settled in the north end of Lombard and raised Bonnie and Bob there. There's something touching to me about a whole family staying in the area, staying connected, and being close by. Love of family and place got passed down too, it seems. Bob and Nancy were leaders in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Every year they took a 2-week family vacation. I loved learning about the vacations they took, which included visiting train museums, of course. Every 5 years, the family would go to Cumberland Falls State Park in southeastern Kentucky, where Bob and Nancy had gone on their honeymoon. Every Christmas and New Year's, they made a circle through Green Hills and Quincy to visit grandparents and extended family, keeping families tight despite a bit of distance. Bob helped found the Fox Valley Trolley Museum, and his friend and co-founder is here with him today. Starting first as a railway investment club in August of 1959, incorporating then as Railway Equipment Leasing and Investment in 1961, they built a museum dedicated to the interurban electric trains that once operated in the Chicago area. Can you imagine that? Speaking of innovation, speaking of interest that goes so deep, they then built up a museum that maintains to this day a collection of 30 antique electric trolleys, railroad cars, locomotives, which range in construction dates from 1887 to 1959, y'all. Bob remembers spending Sundays at the museum, and our Bob remembers spending Sundays at the museum with his dad working as a motorman or conductor on the trips down the line and back. Later, he and Debbie took Shelby and Adam to see Grandpa running the trains. Yeah. In retirement, Bob and Nancy traveled the country and the world together, spent time with their grandkids and their families. With a deeply embedded value of caring for community, Bob drove Meals on Wheels, was an AARP tax aide during income tax season, and continued to work for the Fox Valley Trolley Museum. community, and service. One of the threads, or two of the threads, of Bob's life. Just a look at all the charities listed for donations showed the breadth and depth of his commitment. And I see that commitment in Bonnie and our Bob, in the work that you do to care for our community and to be of service. In later years, even when he couldn't drive there, he answered phone calls for the Christmas ticketing of the Fox River Trolley Polar Express. He was devoted to Nancy and her care in his last years. Ultimately devoted. Family, the big thread running through Bob's life. Holidays were important. They celebrated Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter together every year. He lived modestly and saved money to ensure that he could take care of his wife and his kids no matter what happened. Living modestly allowed him to retire early and live comfortably while providing for his family in the case of emergency. Our Bob noted that his dad lived a full life with few regrets. Isn't that something that we would all hope for? To live life without regrets, or with few regrets. He lived his own version of the American dream: a loving partner, 2 kids, a comfortable home, along with a commitment to community and giving back. In his later years, he was clearly thankful to have his family around him. And would that we would all be able to say of our legacy that our legacy was love and had few regrets. Love of family, community, gratitude for life's gifts and opportunities. These threads, woven together, are the tapestry of Bob's life, like a quilt that covers all of the recipients of that care and love with warmth and memory, wrapping you, keeping you warm, helping you to live through the influence that you received. We are thankful for the life of J. Robert Wayman and for the legacy of love that has been left behind and from which the family and friends all continue to live. Bob's sweater is on the chair. Where I'm from, we say presente. J. Robert Wayman, Bob, presente. He's here with us. We're going to have an opportunity now. I have pieces of a story so beautifully told by Bonnie, beautifully written by Bob, with color from John, and hearing all about Bob. But you have more color. You have more stories. And this is a time in our memorial, in our celebration of life, where if you have a story to share, something that you would like to share, we would want to hear from you. I'm going to bring down the mic, but if you want to come up to the podium, you go ahead and let me know. So I know I have members of the family who are going to speak, and is there someone who would like to speak first? Do you want the mic, or you want to come up?
Here's his sweater. Still has in one pocket sugar substitute, and in the other pocket 4 neatly folded, perfectly clean Kleenexes. So, and I kept trying to ask him if I could fix the sweater, because there's one hole, and
you can use this mic.
And he didn't want me to fix it. He liked it just the way it was. So he really did, as Beth said, instill a lot of love and learning And since we're in a UNU church with him, I'll tell you about the summer of '87. And he was forward-thinking, my very conservative father in life, but was forward-thinking in his thoughts and always learning new things or trying to learn new things. Could be hard sometimes for an engineer to grasp certain other modes, but as long as it was analyzed and analytical, he got it. So in the summer of '87, John and I had been engaged for a while, and Bob had met Debbie, and we were all trying to save money and go on our pursuits. Bob was graduated, I believe, but saving money for his future home. And John and I were in school and trying to sort out ours, and Debbie was working on her thesis. So what does a person from California do when they don't have a place to live? And a person who's had lived also in Minnesota, we ask our parents, can they come here? And forward-thinking dad, this PG-13 here, forward-thinking dad even let us share their bedrooms, which was quite an early state for our owl classes. And later, I guess that sort of prepped me for later. One summer he was taking a trip with Mom, and he asked me to seriously and nicely to quickly mail a certain set of pills he had forgotten to take with him that were blue in nature. And so, of course, I did it, and I threw in a couple extra with a note saying, don't forget to make sure Mom has hers. So that was part of that. But part of the summer of '87 meant we also had to put on a car show for everybody in the neighborhood, because all of us having different jobs, we had to organize all the cars so that it was aligned for the morning, so no one would have tiffs over who's getting out first and all that. So every night we'd switch our cars around up and down the street, and figured people were probably watching with popcorn. But it was a great summer, and he was great to double his kids. That meant a lot to all of us. Another story I have prior to '87 was, as you mentioned, the cooking. Dad had learned some good cooking recipes: pork chops, fried chicken, liver and onions. He could cook them better than anybody. And but anyway, one night a week it was his turn to cook. The other nights we cooked, and so I don't know. One day after school, I didn't come home like I was supposed to, and put the roast in the oven and all of that. And he liked his 4-course meal, and I screwed up. But John's mom had been one of the first to get a new device that was going to save our workload, called a microwave oven. We didn't have one, so I quickly called them and said, "Can I use your mom's microwave oven?" Rushed the roast over there thinking, he'll never know. And of course, it looked awful, really awful, and tasted terrible. And I thought, this is it, here it goes. He's gonna bark at me and it's gonna be bad. And he didn't. He figured, I think he figured that we'd all suffered enough with that roast. And I got a lecture on how microwaves work, and that we should, you know, they cook from the inside out, but not exactly the inside out, yada, yada, yada. And don't do that again. So we suffered through it, and I learned my lesson, and never again. But he was kind that way, to not actually just let me have it. So that was good, because underneath it all, he was a pussycat. And he loved Mom so much. And he loved all of us so much. Debbie and John were just kids too, you know, we were theirs, our kids were theirs. Dad had the family he wanted. And, you know, he would tell me about all kinds of things, but one thing he knew was when someone was in love. And that was really weird coming from an engineer. Somebody who couldn't understand why girls are loud or girls giggle or, you know, all these other things. He couldn't understand, but he knew when John had a judo accident. And it was pretty serious, but he came out okay. A friend got him a little too much in that battle. And I was terrified, because this was high school too. And Dad took me to see him, and he said he knew right then and there. So he wasn't surprised at all 7 years later when we got married. But there's a lot of him in all of us, including our kids. His tenacity, his analysis of situations, as you talked about, are I don't remember how to explain this, but something about how the power circulates our telecom systems. Anyway, all of that out here is due to him. And that tenacity was amazing, and I knew how much he was valued at work, because he'd take us on some of his big overtime trips. He was always very conscious of the money and worked a lot of extra hours. And we went with him, and when he would show up at the substation, which I know the difference between a substation and a transformer, but when he would take us, they were so glad to see him. They were so glad, and he could just, he would fix it, whatever the problem was, and they were so grateful. But that kind of tenacity is in all of us, in our kids, and in Bob, obviously, and the way we can look at things. It carried over into my job and carried over into Bob's. There's a bunch of other things I have written here, but I don't know if I'm gonna get through them. Some of the tenacity helped him to actually gain life, even though I feel he could have gone a little longer. He was a big guy. He was a real big guy. He liked his meals, and he liked you to clean. He was part of the clean plate club, and so he got kind of large. And at some point, he got scared, and the doctors had talked to him about something. I'm not exactly sure which aspect. And so in his retirement, he went and worked out 3 to 5 times a week, running on a stationary bike, going uphill, downhill, all of that. And he liked to say he lost to Caitlin, because he lost 100 pounds at one point and got off all of his diabetes medicines. He was that tenacious, and the doctors loved it, because he would ask good questions, and they would put it into terms, and we would work through those, and anything they asked him to do, he would do it. If they wanted him to work on water, he worked on water. If they wanted him to work out more, he worked out more. Physical therapy, whatever they wanted. He even had earned the rights to alter some of his medication as needed, which a lot of doctors don't want anyone to do. So I'm not telling you to do that. But he did. And he kept a beautiful spreadsheet that he thought everybody, loved, and they did, and they wished all their patients came in with those beautiful spreadsheets, but that's how he was able to do it. He used that ability, and it extended his life more than once. And he couldn't beat the last gremlin, though. It got him. So I guess my final word is have a banana for breakfast, because that's what his wish was to be. He was going to go get a banana for breakfast before he was gonna get that surgery. And the other last thing is, in the UU tradition, he was not a believer in a lot of spiritual stuff, but he did have spirituality more than people could imagine. And every holiday, every big family meal, the old softy would come out and he would cry at the head of the table and say 59 years ago, at 1959, he could not have imagined this. And he loved us all so much. That's all.
Adam, do you want to come up or? Okay.
Bob really kind of comes out a little bit in stuff you've already heard, but he really cared about journeys. He took them really seriously. He liked taking them. And he used them, stealing an observation my sister had a couple weeks ago. He used them as a way to connect to people around him. When anyone in his family would travel anywhere, he knew more about your travel plans than you did. He would know if your plane was delayed. He would know what company manufactured whatever vehicle you were traveling in. He had thoughts when some of us moved up to Washington Island. The thing that excited him most was not just that there was a ferry line, but that the ferry had cameras connected to the internet. He could see what the conditions were. And sometimes it was just conversation later, and sometimes you'd be driving north and you'd just get a text that was like, water's looking choppy today. But transportation was clearly one of his special interests, but he connected to people like that over did anything. He liked figuring things out. He'd read anything that was left lying around. He used to read Grandma's nursing magazines. Part of how he ended up asking all those detailed questions of doctors, because the information had been around and he wanted to know. And you can see that in all of his kids and grandkids. We're all curious, we're all intellectually confident, sometimes to the point of recklessness. And that is very much his influence. We never had a kids' table experience at family meals. He never thought that it was weird to talk about politics with a 10-year-old. Was undoubtedly part of why I ended up studying it, because I got to think about it and enjoy talking about it from a very young age because of him. So, you know, I take comfort in knowing that he was just as organized and prepared for his last journey as he was for all of his other ones. He had things prepared. He wanted them to service. I'm sure that he thinks that we're a little unorganized about this, but part of what made him both a really good engineer and a really good grandfather was that for all of that love of planning and spreadsheets and journeys, he had a really high comfort level with chaos and with mess. And so I don't think he'd be that disappointed in how we pulled this off.
So I'll preface this by saying I think my grandfather is rolling over in his grave because he was a great believer in short and to the point, and when I got done I had 4 pages. Fortunately for you, some of my stories have already been told, so I can just skip over some of those. What do I want to remember about Dad? Memories fail and details are lost, even with those close to us. New concerns and experiences threaten to crowd out the old, but there are some things I will never forget about Dad. There's a Hebrew proverb that says, Say not in grief he is no more, but in thankfulness that he was. Dad was a husband, a father, and a family man. He was an engineer, he was frugal, he was curious, and he followed his own path. Dad was a husband deeply committed to his partner and his relationship. Dad married a strong-willed woman who became a second-wave feminist and a member of NOW and the League of Women Voters. While sometimes they would argue about decisions, they always worked through it and came to a shared decision. I'm not sure how much he realized what he was getting into when he proposed, how many of us really do, but he loved Mom and he embraced her independence. Frankly, I think she made him a better man, and he knew it. Dad loved his family and was committed to his role as a father, providing guidance and structure, financial security, and the experiences that would help his children grow. Whether he was serving as a scout leader, providing financial guidance and assistance, or taking us on vacations, Dad was there for us. He never tried to do it all for us. He wanted us to be independent and responsible and gave us space to fail. In later years, Dad was never happier than when he was sharing family meals on holidays. This is a paragraph I can skip because Bonnie told us about the summer with 3 families under one roof. I would share though my version of the cooking experience so the 3 couples rotated making meals. So one night, for whatever reason, we were making spaghetti and we made vegetarian spaghetti, not because we were particularly vegetarian at the time, we just did it. Dad was appalled. A meal was not a meal unless it had meat in it. And my recollection is he got up and got bologna out of the refrigerator and added it to his spaghetti sauce. The other story I would tell about that summer, because it illustrates that he could be strong-willed and very clear-cut in when he thought was right and wrong, he would also admit when he was wrong, and he could have a chuckle at himself. So all of us, the fridge didn't have an ice maker, so we had to fill the things, put them in the freezer. And Dad was just sure that none of us were doing our fair share of filling the ice trays and making enough ice. When we all moved out, Dad realized that really he wasn't making enough ice for his own use. And to his credit, he admitted that to us all, and it was kind of a family chuckle for most of the time since. As Adam mentioned, I would just add, how many executives do you know landing in a foreign city a long way from home get a text from their dad saying, "Welcome to." FlightAware was both a blessing and a curse. Dad was also pretty modest. He never had to have the latest car, never had to have the fanciest house. The only thing I ever really heard him brag about was his family and his kids. It was a little disconcerting towards the end when I would have a chance to talk to a caregiver when Dad wasn't around, and they would start reciting parts of my life that I didn't really expect a caregiver to know. As we've discussed, Dad was an engineer and a problem solver. He wanted to master the tools of complex technical problems. He was good at it, and I think frequently cost is an important variable that you control as an engineer, and that obviously suited his frugality. I think at times these very nonlinear, complicated people threw that off. And I think he knew that was a problem, he never really mastered it, but I never sensed that he had any malice. Even when he was saying something that hurt somebody, it was because he just didn't understand. With apologies to those of you who have heard this joke before, Dad truly fit my favorite engineer joke. So there's an engineer, a doctor, and a priest out playing golf. And they get stuck behind this group that's taken forever. And they're getting really frustrated. And so finally they catch a groundskeeper and what's with these guys? They're taking forever. The groundskeeper says, "Oh, that's our group of blind firefighters. They lost their eyesight saving our clubhouse. So we let them play anytime they want for free." And the priest says, "Oh, that's sad. I'll say a prayer for him tonight." The doctor says, yeah, and I'll talk to my ophthalmologist friend and see if there's anything we can do for him. And the engineer says, well, why can't they play at night? That was kind of dead. And as we've talked about, he was frugal. I think definitely he got that from mom and dad, or from grandma and grandpa. But it was frustrating at times, like when he would have me buy him a gallon of milk. This is Beacon Hill. He'd have me buy a gallon of milk because that was the cheapest, and then he would split it into 16-ounce containers and freeze the ones that were going to be around longer, because that saved that last 10 cents or whatever. But he wasn't miserly about it. He was generous when it was the right time to be generous. Dad was curious. He read voraciously and eclectically. We heard about the nursing magazines. We'd have somebody at the family table would ask Mom, what about this thing? And Dad would jump in before she could get a word in edgewise, because he'd read the last 10 years of nursing magazines. When Deb's aunt first came to visit, when we had gotten serious, and Deb's aunt was a very proper, very mannered person, Dad basically interrogated her about her job, and not because he was worried about it. He just was really curious. She worked for a union and she managed benefits or something like that, and he just really wanted to understand how that worked. Let's see. So, and then he followed his own path. He was a geek. Before we really talked a lot about that, he wore a pencil pack. There's a pocket protector out there. Never seemed to be self-conscious about it. Being a rail fan, traveling places to see trains, memorizing routes and equipment, does not generally elevate one's social standing or provide the same easy small talk that sports does. Again, it was his thing. He didn't really care if you liked it. I mean, if you were unhappy to talk to him about it, he cared, but he didn't think that was strange or anything. So he devoted a lot of time to the Fox Valley Train Museum, Charlie Museum, wore the conductor's hat and the white shirt and the black pants. He was into it. He also taught me how it can be important to look like you belong. I learned that accompanying him, exploring various railroad yards, talking to the train conductors and the motormen of the transit system, and his natural curiosity and comfort with what he was doing, I think, ingratiated him with people that otherwise would have been like, what the heck are you doing here? Get out of my cab, I'm trying to drive a train. So I think in the end, he really did live his best life. He had a loving and long-lasting marriage, a family he loved, contributed to the community, and through the Fox Valley Charlie Museum, volunteering, his charitable contributions. He was successful in work and his investments, and provided financial security for his family and the means to pursue his passions. So I will remember Dad for the great examples he gave me, his joyful pursuit of idiocentric passions, his curiosity and love of reading, his contributions to the community, and his love of family.
See, there's always so much more to a person. Thank you, family, for sharing your stories. If there is someone who would like to share, I'm going to come down with the mic, and if you have a story or something that you'd like to share briefly, family would invite you to do that.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that was lovely about my life with Bob and Nancy is that they were nearby. neither Bob or I grew up near our grandparents, and so we had a chance to watch them interact with our kids regularly and to create that larger sense of family that we all cherish and that Bob cherished. And one of the memories that I remember, because we lived close enough to pop out to the Trolley Museum when we needed and go for a bike ride, which is what Bob was into at that point, was we were all on a family bike ride, including Grandma and Grandpa, everybody on a bike going along the Fox River where there were hills. And Shelby was in a lovely trailer behind her dad, who was doing just fine going up that hill. I had Adam on the trailer bike behind me. He really pedaled fast and hard when we went downhill, not so much when we were going uphill. And I was just getting ready to stop. I could see the top, and I'm like, I can't do this. I'm not going to make it. And I hear coming up behind us in Bob Sr.'s voice, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And I kept pedaling, and Adam started pedaling. So he had a good influence at a very young age, and we cherished our time with him.
Anyone else? For the memories that have been shared, for the memories that are held in our hearts, I invite a moment of silent reflection. I'm going to invite us into a litany of remembrance. It's from the Jewish tradition, and it's in our hymnal, and it's been adapted as a litany. And your response is, we remember him. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the rains of winter, in the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, in the blueness of the sky and the warmth of summer, in the rustling leaves and in the beauty of autumn, in the beginning of the year and when it ends, when we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick at hearts, when we have joys we yearn to share, when we see trains and feel the joy, when we have a problem that needs to be solved and figured out. Yes, we remember him. J. Robert Wayman, Bob. So long as we live, Bob shall live, for he is part of all who have known him. I love that Bob picked simple gifts and ode to joy. Hearing the weaving of the stories, all of them together, it just fits, doesn't it? Simplicity, love, family, and joy. In a moment, our service will conclude, and the family invites you to join us for refreshments, which is in our social hall. There are also the beautiful display of all of the beautiful remembrances of Bob and a guest book if you haven't signed that. So I'm sure the family, we would love for you to sign that. We now extinguish the candle in the memory of J. Robert Wayman, whose physical body is no longer with us, but whose passionate and loving spirit will be with us always. In mystery we're born, in mystery we live, in mystery we die. Humbly we stand in the face of death. Confidently we stand with life. Our strength is the strength of love and community. May understanding go with us and peace too, that we may live together in compassion and joy.